Look, I can't see things happening at the Pentagon without the words of David K. Johnston kind of echoing around in my head. You talk about replacing generals being sort of out of the authoritarian playbook. And I don't want to say that everything that's happening at the Pentagon works into the authoritarian playbook, but the latest out of Pete Hegseth's strategy involves getting rid of a lot of these four-star generals and essentially decapitating part of the Pentagon. Can you contextualize this for us?
Well, first of all, you can make a reasonable argument that we should have more or fewer general officers, and admirals are also general officers. But I think what they're clearly doing here is targeting for removal general officers who are not white and not male. And we'll see when the list comes out of who they push into retirement. But that's the essence of what's going on here. I mean, this is a white supremacist, misogynistic, authoritarian president. And Hegseth, who was, remember, a junior officer, he was a captain. Captains, lead small units in the field and direct them. He's not at the level where strategy is important. You're principally a tactical person at that point. You're given something you're to go do, and then you figure out the tactics of how you accomplish that. And furthermore, his behavior suggests strongly that his promise to never have another drink was nonsense. And we should all be very, very worried about that. But the next step that will matter after they clear out 20% is the stated goal of senior military leaders is, do they promote people out of turn and primarily for their loyalty to Trump? That's the next step to be worried about. And clearly, Pete Hegseth was appointed for his loyalty to Trump, and there's no other value in what he's doing. So that's the thing we should watch for. And it's a little surprising Trump hasn't moved to fill those positions. But remember, Donald is not diligent. Donald is not a strategic thinker. And he very much is a person who's impulsive. For example, over the weekend on his local TV station in Florida, they showed Escape from Alcatraz, the 1979 movie. And then the next day, Donald was saying, we're going to reopen Alcatraz, which is not going to happen. But it's the kind of impulsive, childish junior high school thinking that has always characterized Donald's behavior.
And it's something that, we were just talking about this before you joined us, that we in the media have to pay attention to, even though we know it's just a shiny object that seizes the news cycle. There's no practical way that Alcatraz is going to be reopened. It's a little like the Canada thing. I mean, there's no way that we're invading Canada, David, but he still smack talks Canada, and we can get to the Canada thing in a moment since the Canadian Prime Minister is meeting with Trump. But in a way, because he is president of the United States, his every utterance takes on significance.
Well, yes, but the issue, I think, is how you cover it.
Okay.
There's something called a truth sandwich. So instead of quoting Donald Trump as saying one of his many crazy things and then taking it apart, what you do is you say, in essence, the way you write the news article or report it on TV or radio, we're about to tell you this thing Donald Trump said that's bizarre. Then you quote it, and then you explain it. And that way people are set up to understand that what he said is not sort of normal business. And we're not doing that. And we're also not doing follow-up questions. One of the reasons Donald gets away with a lot of stuff and has for the last 10 years is the lack of follow-up questions. So when he was on with Kristen Welker on NBC's Meet the Press Sunday, and she asked him about defending upholding the Constitution, and he said, I don't know. She didn't come back and say, how can you not know? You took an oath. And this is a real problem, not following up and pressing. And, the same thing when Trump sat down with Terry Moran of ABC. I don't think you're going to see him sit down with CBS after what 60 Minutes has done. But Terry Moran asked, in many cases, very good questions, but he didn't follow up. When Donald gets questioned under oath, lawyers who've done so, and I've read a lot of transcripts of Donald's interviews under oath, depositions under oath, they follow up. So when Donald one day was asked in the Tim O'Brien case, what do you know about accounting? I don't know anything about accounting. They didn't just let it go on. They spent several pages of transcript tying down 6 ways to heaven so that he could never wiggle away from that statement. And journalists need to do that. And if you get cut off from the White House, guess what? DC report and ran its entire operation, and the White House never once returned our phone calls.
Right. You don't need always the access, but that's great that you touch on that, because I think a lot of the media plays for that access. They don't want to be so tough on Trump that they get cut off. In fact, you could see a little bit of that in the Welker interview, how she, you're tiptoeing so as not to enrage the Mad King. I thought the follow-up should have been, let me just be clear about this. You're not sure if this deportation order violates the Constitution, or you're not sure if you should defend the Constitution. In other words, I wanted clarity in that moment of what he was saying.
That's a perfectly good thing to do, to frame it that way. But the concept that needs to be paid attention to is following up. Trump finally came out this week because he's been gotten kickback from people about the picture of him with the Pope. And classic Donald style, the first thing he does is he throws his wife under the bus. He blames Melania. Oh, she thought it looked cute. So he always evades responsibility. And then he goes, basically, this is a joke. These are not jokes. Jokes are supposed to be funny. A joke doesn't necessarily have to have a punchline at the end, but they're intended to be funny. These are not funny. These are serious, and they are clear signals of how Donald thinks. And this goes to, as I've said many times on your show, Donald not only thinks he's the only person competent to lead the U.S. government, but he thinks he should run the whole world. And he's now finally said it 14 years after I first said it.
No, that's right. You were on to his plan all along. Of course, when you first started talking about it, he wasn't in a position to do it. Now he is in a position to sort of take shots at it. And that AI Pope picture, it was so weird, the timing of it. I mean, he just had attended the Pope's funeral. I mean, it was crazy.
Well, and here's what's really troubling. At the funeral, there was a lot of news attention, especially broadcast news, to the fact that he wore a blue suit, not a royal blue, not a navy blue, which would be appropriate at a funeral. Excuse me, but a light blue suit as he usually wears. What wasn't very much covered was that the world leaders who were there shunned him. There's video that ran on Italian television where nobody wants to be around him. And there's one, I assume the scene was shot the day of the funeral in Rome, in Vatican City. I don't literally know this. There's a scene of him forcing himself, it looks like, on one man.
Macron, I think it was. Yeah, the French, president.
The context suggests that it was there. But that's the story. Nobody wants to be around this fellow. And of course, Trump's diehard followers, which are 25% or so of the population, doesn't matter what he does. If you literally shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, they'll say, well, good. And if you say, well, wait a minute, the person he shot was a cardinal. Well, that's okay. That's okay. God will forgive him. But the rest of us need to really recognize what's going on here. He's ruining our economy. He's ruining our standing in the world. He's making us less safe. Well, you were gone, I said, with Kim hosting, that there will be some kind of attack on us. If you're the Iranians or someone else who wants to do us harm, it would be foolish of you not to think up some evil plot, some evil stunt like 9/11. And that's what it was. It had no military significance on 9/11. It was designed to change America's, to exacerbate internal tensions in the U.S. And the second part Osama bin Laden thought was nuts, and that was that we would send a military into the Middle East and the Arab armies would vanquish the United States. That's not going to happen. But the first part, he was absolutely successful at. And somebody who doesn't wish well for us is going to find a way to exploit this, that we've stopped all sorts of cyber measures to protect us. I mean, tens of thousands of times a day, foreign governments try to penetrate our computers. We do the same thing to other people.
Right.
But you
This
have
is the
to
key, because he's
defend
dismissed
yourself.
a lot of those cyber sleuths who are protecting the U.S. are gone.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's talent and knowledge that you just can't replace off the shelf.
I was talking before, David, about, it was in relation to the EPA. I forget, we got an email, I think, and it started me on a riff about the EPA because it's being completely dismantled. I mean, this guy, Lee Zeldin, he's just a despicable guy. I mean, he's committed to rolling back all the restrictions on toxins in the air, water, soil. It's really taking us back to like 1962. And, we got the EPA because of the way that we polluted our own world. I'm talking about America. Leave aside the rest of the globe. Yeah, and
for 100 years, the Cayuga River in Cleveland caught fire, and in 1969, because of television news, it got national attention. And then a Republican president, a very conservative Republican president, Richard Nixon, supported and signed the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. But now what we're seeing is that Donald Trump said he was going to drain the swamp. Remember that phrase from long ago?
Yeah, but that was from Trump season 1, David. I remember that.
That was so recent, my hair had already turned gray. That this now it's a polluter's paradise, and we will pay a price for this. The problem is when the price is paid, Donald Trump will be gone. I'll be gone. Because the heart disease and the asthma and the cancers, those take time, but they're going to come back. And remember, we live in a country where the maternal death rate in Mississippi, the poorest state, is worse than in Ghana.
Wow. That's a great stat. I didn't know it.
It's in a forthcoming book by Dr. Stephen Bezrushka, friend of mine who was a wandering doctor for 30 years in Nepal, treating people. He'd go from village to village and treat people. And he's been a professor for 25 years, I think, at the University of Washington Public Health School, which is one of the best health schools in the country. And he has a book coming out where he diagnoses America as if America was his patient in the examination room.
That's a brilliant idea. Yeah,
absolutely brilliant.
You'll have to connect us so that we can get him on, if you would. I want to ask you, I do want to get to the tariffs and the economy and that sort of thing, and I also want to get to a law and order question, but just because we're on sort of the nature of Trump and the assertion of power, the flex, he had, I think, reflected those instincts when he told Mexico's President Sheinbaum, hey, we want to come down there with troops and we want to take on the cartels for you, kind of thing. And she is now pushed back, and she was making remarks to the university in Mexico, and she said, and the Wall Street Journal had it, that, thanks, but no thanks. I do know President Trump. The territory cannot be violated. Sovereignty cannot be sold. Sovereignty is cherished and defended. It's not necessary. We can collaborate. We can work together, she said. But you in your territory and us in ours, we can share information, but we will never accept the presence of the United States Army in our territory.
Listen, you want to break the cartels, and that's a serious problem in Mexico, and they involve all the way up to the top of the government under some of the administrations. Stop this war on drugs, which hasn't worked. If you turn around and legalize drugs, and there are various ways to do that, you take your losses in a different way. Any solution to a problem, you have losses. If we were to ban handguns in America, for example, I wrote about this, 45 years ago. If you banned handguns in America, you'd have fewer people walking into a bodega with a pistol in their pocket, and a lot fewer shootings. But a few people would take a sawed-off shotgun under their coat in August, and if they use it, it'll be more fatal. I mean, there's no perfection out there. You have to decide where to take your losses. And we're taking our losses in corruption, in not just in the US, but in Mexico and Colombia and other places, and corruption of judges. We've had judges who were on the payroll of narco-trafficantes. And by the way, Chapter 8 of my book, The Making of Donald Trump, is all about the extraordinary favors Donald did for one of the biggest cocaine traffickers in America, his partner and close ally and business associate, Joe Wexelbaum, who lives in Santa Monica today. And you'll notice that Donald has pardoned now a whole bunch of criminals. He's pardoned drug dealers. He's pardoned the Silk Road guy who arranged financial transactions for drug dealers. He just pardoned if he hasn't actually pardoned them, they've signaled they're going to, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy who, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy who was convicted of excessive use of force up in Lancaster. He is getting a sweetheart deal now.
After his conviction, as you say. Yes.
After conviction, and the prosecutors in that case resigned in protest. They are dropping all sorts of other cases. I am told that there is a new budget now for expert witnesses in civil tax cases, not criminal, but civil. The IRS, because of the work it does, has to employ historians, economists, engineers, chemists, physicists as expert advisors to auditors. Apparently, the new budget for expert witnesses is $1 per case, which is to say, there are going to be no cases.
Right.
So if you're a super rich tax cheat who's been using some area of engineering or chemistry or history to rip off the government, well, Donald just signaled that's okay with me.
That is just it's wild to consider it. I mean, it really is wild. I mean, it seems as though corruption and issues related to corruption are all part of the Trump agenda. I mean, it's wild to see what he's doing with the guys who are guilty of all the sexual acts. They've been convicted. They were cooling their heels in prisons overseas,
right? And
now I'm sorry, I just spaced their name, but
they just announced that the Justice Department is going after the state of Washington. It has passed a law that, as I understand it, the law says if you are a priest, pastor, rabbi, imam, and someone in confession has told you about crimes against children, you are obligated to report them to the government. And they're going after the state of Washington, saying this is anti-Catholic legislation. This is designed to punish Catholics for their religious beliefs. Well, I'm sorry, if you're a psychiatrist and your patient tells you they plan to harm someone, you're obligated to break confidentiality. There's no place where any rule is so absolute that it doesn't protect innocent people. But this administration, there are no innocent people to this administration. It's a fundamental aspect of authoritarian regimes. No one is innocent.
Well, look what he did with it's just the kid who was deported with the mother, who's an American citizen, stage 4 cancer. It's as though cruelty is built into the strategies on so many of these deportations. It's deliberate.
Yes, and that's because it's to make you fearful and not stand out. I posted today about how one of my students at RIT wrote 2 papers in a course I was teaching on persuasive writing, opinion writing. And they were really terrific. And I said, you should send this as a letter to the editor or an op-ed to our local daily. And we'd like to publish a DC report, this other one. And the student was afraid that if they did this, somehow that it might catch the attention of someone in the Trump administration who would come after them and explain why they felt the family was vulnerable. They're not immigrants. They're all several generations back American citizens. But I immediately understood why someone would feel that way. And no, people didn't feel that way in any previous administration. I mean, yeah, there are a few nutcases who will tell you they're afraid of somebody, but there was no reason to have such fears. Now there are legitimate reasons to be fearful.
Yeah, they go back in your internet history and they look, this is not only in this administration, but in any private contractor doing business with the administration. I just saw that just because you got us onto this because you just mentioned it.
Yeah.
By the way, just apropos of things you just mentioned, what a great course. I'd love that persuasive writing course. God, I would have loved to have audited that class. But certain Japanese visas that have to be approved here in the U.S. They're going back 5 years on people's internet history and social media posts before they're
Yeah.
approving visas.
Yeah. Well, because part of the whole object here is to destroy the world trade and travel system. America first really means we're going to separate ourselves from the rest of the world. That has never worked for any country anywhere. There's no evidence that the Japanese are antagonists to the United States of America. At the same time that they're doing this to people from Japan, they're not doing it, and they're doing other things to benefit people from Russia. And in all of this is a need to absolutely always keep in the forefront of your mind, Donald doesn't know what he's doing. He's appallingly ignorant. And so the things you're seeing happen are whoever talked to him last and gets an idea in his head. And I don't think I've ever mentioned this on the show, but in the late 80s, early 90s, I had to negotiate with Donald lots of times. Will you make this person available? Can I see this document? I never once got off the phone with him or in person that I didn't say, well, that went better than I expected. Because all you had to do was butter him up, no matter how angry he was at you about something, and start telling him how wonderful he is. And pretty soon he gives away the store. He's a terrible negotiator. It's part of the fraud he's created that he's this great businessman. I noticed in the chat, somebody asked about the Democrats. Every day I get, please send $5 or $1 or $3 from the Democrats. I get it from Donald too, and his merch, which is all made in China, almost everything.
That is the wild part. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but the Democrats really haven't figured out after all this time how to deal with Donald. And AOC and Bernie are not at the center of the party. They're not. Their oligarchy tour is not going to change the country. The Democrats have to figure out that J.B. Pritzker, the billionaire governor of Illinois, got it a lot better. And he's overall done a better job. I don't think he's going to be a candidate either. But first of all,
why do you say that, David? Why do you say that?
Well, partly because, he's the size of Chris Christie, and a lot of people get turned off by that, like it or not. I mean, people have all these biases.
Sure.
Think of all the people who just can't stand Hillary Clinton because she's a woman. And it's ridiculous. The color of your skin should have nothing to do with the color of your hair. It should be the substance of your character and your conduct. But in the real
Donald
world,
Trump isn't exactly Slim Shady, though.
no, he's certainly. You mean he doesn't really only weigh 239 pounds? I'm shocked. Mark.
But I take your point. Okay, that's
so he might be the candidate. He's been a pretty good governor. I think he's very vulnerable because of the long history of Illinois not running its government very well, and being corrupt. Not as corrupt as Ohio, the most corrupt state in the country right now, or New Jersey, but corrupt. But the Democrats have got to come up with a strategy. Now, Pete Buttigieg, you'll notice when he goes on Fox News or he appears on a TV show, he's very self-assured. He knows he never takes the bait. He's very competent at what he does. And, there's a terrible need for a good strategy here. The Republicans have a whole host of people who could help. There's Stuart Stevens and all their names just went out of my head. The guys who formed the Lincoln Project.
Sure, of course, Wilson and the rest of them, yeah.
Yeah, and Rick Wilson and Steve Schmidt, and they could provide pretty good counsel on how to deal with Donald and with the people around him. And they need to be.
Let me just to explore that, to put a specific on it. That's a very in-your-face kind of style they have. Schmidt and Wilson and the rest of them. Lincoln Project is extremely right. They don't countenance anything within this administration. So you're saying that that's an effective strategy in your judgment?
No, I think that they should be listened to. They should meet with these folks because they are effective at many things. The 25% or so of people who believe Donald is essentially a demigod. The only way they're ever going to be separated from Donald is, and you're going to see this on the air, on TV before long, there'll be some poor working mother from one of the red states who's a Trumper, and remember, who's on Medicaid, our federal program of health care for poor people. which primarily benefits red states. The red states are the poorer states. They're the ones with the less stable marriages. There's a very good book about that. Red Families, Blue Families. Very short but well done book by my friend Professor Carbone and a friend of hers, Naomi Kahn. Excellent book. You're going to see a story where some mother's going to say, my little 8-year-old daughter here is going to die because I've lost my Medicaid because I make $25. I made $25 too much last year. And the Trump administration says, too bad, you should be able to afford health care, and the health insurance is her entire income. Or my husband walked out and my mother, who's old and elderly and not well, has been taking care of the children so I can hold 2 jobs and an occasional Saturday job on top of that. And she was getting insulin for $35 a month under Joe Biden, and now it's back to $1,000, and her Social Security check is her only income, and it's $1,000 a month. She's going to die, and what then do we do? That's when you begin to see some, and I emphasize the word some, of the serious Trumpers pull away. There'll be a lot of them who'll go, oh, good, culling the herd. Remember that from the pandemic when Trump was in the first term? Oh,
Right.
don't worry about this. This is just nature culling the herd.
Yeah, let it burn through. That was the big thing. By the way, just on that, I'll just repeat what I had noted prior to your arrival, which is that the new head of the vaccine crew at the FDA, this is the guy who is to be the top vaccine official on research, on funding, et cetera. He is a guy who has been a vocal critic of the FDA's moves to greenlight COVID-19 vaccine boosters. His name is Dr. Vinay Prasad, and he replaces Peter Marks, who served as the director of the Center for Evaluation and Research at the FDA. But he has said all along, I don't like these vaccines. We may not see another COVID-19 booster. Now, for many, you may view it as, hey, we shouldn't, we don't need them, et cetera. But I'd suggest that they're going to reverse engineer any kind of decision. They've already decided they don't like these vaccines. Right. And it extends well beyond COVID-19. And they're going to reverse engineer any research.
And they're going to talk out of both sides of their mouth, because if you press Donald, who funded the Warp Speed project, Merck funded its own project without any government money and got to the same place in the same amount of time. They're going to say, oh, no, we're pro-vaccine, even as they're anti-vaccine. And this is a further example of this is a government. It's a kakistocracy, to use a 17th century word taken out of 2 ancient Greek words. It's a government of the worst. And that's what we have, the government of the absolute worst. People who do not know what they're doing, who are utterly immoral, who don't care about the rules and norms and individual liberty. And healthcare is going to be a key area in this, because they're not only going to cut money for Medicaid, but they're not going to increase reimbursement levels for Medicare. And sooner or later, one of these really dangerous viruses, MERS, Marburg, is going to get loose, because we're no longer giving antivirals to people, where we've corralled it in places in Africa and the Middle East. And once it gets on jetliners and hopscotches around the planet, we'll have another pandemic. And Donald will go, who could have known? And let's, remember, Barack Obama thought that the risk of a pandemic was so important that he had a White House team of about, I think it was 17 people, to make sure that they were in connection everywhere in the world, so that if anything looking like a pandemic started, bingo, we would be on it. And it was one of the first things in the first term that Trump shut down.
It was one of the celebrated aspects of the CDC, that it brought together so many different researchers and medical experts from around the world. And you're right, how that message was not communicated to Trump. It's such an easy one. Hey, dude, we've got to fight this stuff over there so that it doesn't come over here. It's the same kind of terrorism threat. I wanted, just because you touched on it, I thought you might be interested. This is an NBC poll on regret for voting for Trump. What's interesting is they say in this poll, and then they interview a lot of those polled, they say that people are disappointed with the actions of Donald Trump that he's taken, but they'd still vote for Donald Trump again if given the chance.
Right. Well, there's a well-known reason for that, Mark. Con artists, and that's what Donald is. He's a con artist. He uses promises he's never going to keep, and lies that you don't detect as such, to trick you out of your money or your liberty or wherever else it is. And people who've been had by a con artist, it's very hard to admit, oh, I was a fool. It's very painful for people. One of the con artists that I wrote about in the New York Times almost 30 years ago died in prison because a judge literally said to him, sir, if you will stop with this nonsense that you are presenting to the court and just acknowledge what your own attorney has revealed to the court, that you were the victim of a con artist scheme that wiped out you and all of your wealthy clients, I'll release you. And he couldn't do it. He died in prison. I mean, it's really hard. We've had several stories of husbands or wives who their spouse retires thinking everything is fine, and it turns out all the money went in a Nigerian prince scam or one of those other scams. And in a few cases, we've had one of the partners kill themselves rather than confront this. So it's very, very hard to say, yeah, I was a fool.
Yeah, there's so much of our art.
We need something called Con Artists Anonymous. It's sort of like EST, where people used to stand up and say, "Hi, my name is so and so, and I'm a-hole," and get up and say, "I was a fool." As a movement.
And you know, David, this happens all the time. These scams, the Nigerian prince type thing, you know, the kind of stuff you're talking about, it happens all the time. My mother was defrauded out of tens of thousands of dollars. It was like $18,000. She was getting Target gift cards for some guy who said that, you know, he was debugging her computer, and then she kind of bonds with him. She's an elderly lady, so it's craziness. But you're right. So much of yourself is wrapped up in the story of the con artist.
Right.
Even as we told my mother about it, she said, no. Bruce would never try to con me out of money. I mean, and my mother's a Fulbright scholar. She's a brilliant woman, but it does happen. Here's a question for you from the audience. Gregory Deckelman says, please ask about requiring banks to maintain pass-through digital dollar wallets. Is that a good idea? These digital dollar, like Apple Pay or Google Pay, can you speak to this?
I don't know. I don't know. The person you might want to ask about that and give him some advance notice would be Bill Black. Bill was the just grade regulator in San Francisco for the federal government who figured out the savings and loan scam. And as a result, there were over 3,000 indictments and almost 900 high-level bankers, not little guys, but CEOs and managing directors, et cetera, went to prison over this. And Bill then went on to get a doctoral degree in criminology at UC Irvine and came up with the theory of control fraud, in which you get control of a company so you can run it as a fraud. I assure you, nobody teaches that, or certainly didn't teach it before Bill in economics or business classes. We were all taught, oh, the executives of the company will want to run it for their benefit, but they're to make life easier for them and lucrative for them, but they're running it for the benefit of the shareholders. And Bill was like, no, oftentimes they're just criminals and they're using it to commit crimes. So Bill would be just about the best person in America to talk about that. The other would be somebody at the National Consumer Law Center back here on the East Coast.
Okay, we'll follow up and we'll book someone on that. I mean, it's interesting because we do change the way that we do commerce now.
Oh, yeah.
Now there is so much of this digital pass-through stuff, so it's important. The other thing, if you want to just talk about grift, I've never seen, nor I'm sure have you ever seen, grift on the scale that we are seeing it through the digital currencies that Trump has now created a huge buy-in, literal buy-in from the feds on. Right. And he has a digital platform like a Coinbase thing. His family does, okay? It's run by his son, and it's also run by the son of one of his cabinet officials. His secretary is not the guy who's doing the Witkoff, the guy who's doing the Russian negotiation.
His negotiator for the Gaza war and the Ukraine war.
Thank you.
Donald has not filed his ethics statement, or at least I can't find it online. I can't find a news account about it. The last one he filed was in August. I'm not surprised he's thumbing his nose at the law about this, but he's supposed to file an ethics statement. Secondly, the Constitution says that the president and vice president may not receive any gift of any kind whatsoever from a foreign government or the states. And the states would include, because remember, the states are co-equal to the Constitution, except for a few areas. cities and counties and mosquito abatement districts. Those are all creatures of the state. And yet he's out there doing deals and taking money from these outfits in direct violation of the Constitution. And this goes to a problem, Mark, that in the first term, there were several lawsuits brought for Trump violating the Emoluments Clause, which he was openly, clearly doing. And the position of the federal judges who got the cases was, you don't have standing to bring such a case. And that's why I refer to our Constitution as the unenforceable Constitution. It is premised, the framers of our Constitution, when they met in 1787, clearly were worried about the passions of the people, that the hoi polloi and the rabble might get passionately affected, as we see with Trump. And so they put in safeguards against the people. They didn't put in safeguards with a mechanism against a president who's crazy or malicious or avaricious, because they couldn't imagine that that would be the case. I mean, we don't have a lot of records of what happened at the Constitutional Convention, but I've read a lot on it for classes I've taught, and I don't see any indication that they sat around and said, what do we do if we get a con man, a crook someday in the White House?
Well, they did, David. They did try to balance the executive power, did they not, with the general construction?
Yes. Oh, no, absolutely. And we have allowed presidents to have far more power than the Constitution provides. If you go read Article 2, the relevant portion of it, because the oath is just the oath, but the relevant portion of the Constitution in Article 2 essentially says, your job is to do whatever Congress instructs you to do. Oh, and you're the commander of the military. That's all it says. It doesn't say you cannot spend money. And the Supreme Court held, when Warren Burger, a Nixon appointee, was the Chief Justice of the United States, that when Congress appropriates money, Nixon was required to spend it, and so is every other president. And certainly there should be lawsuits saying, wait a minute, we have a 15-year cancer study or breast cancer study or birth defect study that's been going on, and why would you suddenly shut it down? That doesn't save any money. You just wasted all the money we've spent so far. I think historians, and when we get all the records somewhere in the future, and it may be after you and I are both gone, are going to find out that, in fact, the real function of DOGE was to protect Elon Musk from inquiry into his abusive tactics under the billions of dollars he has in federal contracts, to remove accountability and to get him new contracts and new avenues to make more money. It was simply a criminal enterprise posing as something would save the taxpayers' money.
That is absolutely 100% correct. And it is demonstrably the case if you talk to those who were part of witnessing what DOGE was doing. And I also think I'd add to that, and clearly you're right, even just based on the agencies he went after, in the order he went after them, they all had ongoing investigations or actual penalties that were being imposed on Elon Musk, EPA, USAID, et cetera. But he also was scraping and continues to have all of this personal information. It's presumed. I mean, we don't know, because even as they advertise transparency, it's just the opposite. That's the disinformation, that they advertise transparency. But I think he scraped all that information, David, from all of these, both taxpayers and at the IRS and even at these other agencies he's been part of.
And what that allows you to do is create a Singaporean-style police state. If you go to Singapore, it's beautiful. It's just looks like a paradise. And so long as you're not crosswise with the government, things are fine. But you get crosswise with the government for any reason, and you will discover nobody sees the knife as it's plunged right into your back. It's a very effective police state because it has this nice outlook, but enormous power. In Singapore, they have the drawings for every building. They know where every electric outlet is in every building. It's astonishing what they have. And the reason they went after Social Security was the Republicans have wanted to kill Social Security from the get-go, 90 years ago this year. If they can screw up the payments, which will happen, then they can say, well, see, it doesn't work and we need to shut it down. And that, Steve Bannon, as with Medicaid, keeps warning the Trump people, don't do that. That will be a mistake. It'll blow up in your face. We'll see.
It's
whether
the one part of government you should keep running so
Yeah.
that you don't get that blowback.
Yeah, and running it smoothly, and recognizing that it runs on 1950s software, but it works. So
Right. In
why
fact,
would you go through the time and expense to create modern software since you can make this other stuff work?
that whole thing about we're paying to 150-year-old Americans, all that thing,
Utter
that was a software safeguard, actually, to put in
Right.
150 so that the checks weren't cut to those people. Yet they were dining out on that for a week. They're still talking about that as though it really is a thing.
And the 11-year-olds getting Social Security who are orphans.
Yeah.
There's the function there that if you're a mom or dad and you die while your kids are young, the surviving spouse or whoever becomes the caretaker, they get Social Security money for you. None other than Paul Ryan, who ran for vice president and was Speaker of the House, a Republican from Wisconsin, says that the only way his family got through the years after his dad died was Social Security for him and his, assuming his siblings. I don't remember.
And yet Ryan went after entitlement programs pretty hard, as I recall.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
It's, they forget their past pretty quickly.
And never called things like the right to defer paying taxes if you own a business 30 years into the future an entitlement. But if the law says you can do something, it's an entitlement. The difference between that kind of entitlement that I've exposed in my tax and other books and something like Social Security is you pay a tax for Social Security. You pay a tax for Medicare. Being able to defer your income tax into the future, which is a zero interest loan from the government. That's the benefit you're getting. And there are people out there with billions of dollars of zero interest loans from the government whose value is being eroded every year by inflation. They didn't pay anything to get that. They're entitled without paying. The rest of us, we paid, and we should be entitled to collect.
It's corporate welfare. And there it is. David, thank you for your time. You're always so generous. Look forward to next week, and thanks for everything.
Take care.
All right, David K. Johnston, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.